Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest event in the Thinking About series. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mr. Fletcher, the Head of Libraries at Dulwich College, and it is a great privilege for me to welcome and introduce Zarah Govett, our speaker for this afternoon's talk on dystopian fantasy. Sarah is brilliantly qualified to talk about dystopias as the author of the fantastic trilogy, The Territory, set in 2059 in an England beset by the consequences of global warming, where large areas of the country are now underwater. It's a great series that explores really relevant themes of social engineering, education, fake news, government manipulation of the truth, etc. And Dulwich College students and I were very fortunate to have been involved in judging the Trinity School's Book Award when it was awarded to Sarah for The Territory in 2018, a really deserving winner. Sarah's latest book, We Go On Forever, has just been published. It's another thrilling read set in a dystopian future where antibiotics have lost their efficacy against disease, and only the wealthy elite, level ones, have access to a controversial transitioning treatment to extend their lives. It's literally an unputdownable book. I read it in just a few hours over the weekend. And like other great dystopian fiction, it provides a lot to think about the future of mankind with a particular emphasis on medical ethics. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Sarah has to tell us about writing dystopian fantasy, and also to fielding questions that will be posed by JAGS and Dulwich students Elizabeth, Zarah and Billy. So without any more ado, I would like to hand over to Sarah Govett.
Thank you very much. So I'm thrilled to be here today to talk to you about dystopian fiction. So I don't know if you all know the term, but by dystopia, what we're really talking about is a story set in a future or alternate reality where everything's gone bad. So you might have heard the term utopia, which is like a perfect world. So dystopia is like the opposite of that. And I think these have been my sort of favorite sort of books since I was about your age. And I think they appealed to me for two main reasons. So firstly, on a superficial level, they're really fun to read. They're normally lots of plot twists. The stakes are really high. It's life or death. There's often some evil regime to overthrow. So yeah, they're normally thrillers and they're hard to put down. But on a deeper level, I think the reason these books kind of stay with me, at least the kind of good ones do, is because they're really going to the heart of what it means to be human, to have a shared humanity. And what they're often doing is they're acting as a vehicle for social commentary. So what I mean by that is the author's taking some aspect of contemporary society that troubles them, they're magnifying it for dramatic effect, and then reflecting it back at the reader. So thinking of dystopia that loads of you will have read, or at least watched the film of, The Hunger Games. Okay, so in The Hunger Games, Suzanne Collins is commenting about like the difference between like the life of the rich and the life of the poor. So the haves of the people in the capital, and then the have-nots, the people in the districts who are having to compete to kind of fight to the death in these Hunger Games. And she's also talking about the horrors of reality TV. So the fact that we do watch people getting humiliated and bullied as a form of entertainment. And it's not that great a stretch of the imagination to turn that into people kind of being hurt or even killed as a form of entertainment. Probably the classic dystopia of all time, 1984. So if you haven't read this, you definitely need to. It's absolutely amazing. So it's set in a totalitarian world where the government, all controlling government, watches every aspect of your life. So you'll watch when you're at work, you're watched at home in your apartment through like a huge telescreen. And the government, they control you by rewriting history, and they change and manipulate language. So it's absolutely amazing. So that was written in 1948, published in 1949. So if you think about it, it's just after the end of the Second World War. So George Orwell, he's writing about totalitarianism. So he's writing about the Nazis, he's writing about Stalin in Russia. So when I wrote my first trilogy, The Territory, there were two things I wanted to write about. So again, quick recap. The territory is set 40 years in the future. Half of Britain is underwater. Everyone wants to stay on the remaining dry land, which is called the territory, but there's just not enough space to fit and feed everyone. So when you hit 15, you have to sit an exam. If you pass the exam, you get to stay on the dry land, but if you fail it, you get sent to the malaria wetlands, which is basically a death sentence. And the ministry claims the system's completely fair because everyone has to sit the exam, regardless of colour, class or creed. But the reality is very different. So the richest people in society, they can do a procedure on their kids whereby they can upload information from a computer into their brain through like a node in the back of their neck. And therefore they're kind of virtually guaranteed to pass. So it's a 3-part thriller set in that world. And it's recently been optioned for TV, so fingers crossed that's going to happen. But yeah, so the 2 things I wanted to comment on when I was writing this series, firstly, the environment. So I don't know if you guys are worried about global warming. I mean, a lot of young people are just such important and kind of vocal actors for change. So that's absolutely amazing. I'm really worried about global warming. And it's going to sound corny, but I've got 3 young kids and I'm worried about what sort of future we're leaving behind for them. And I don't know if you know about, there's an organization called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And what they do is they take the reports of top scientists all around the world, put them together, and then they publish reports saying that this is the state of the world at the moment. This is what we need to do. And the most recent report said that unless we take urgent action, we're heading towards widespread and irreversible damage. So irreversible meaning we can't make it better again. And lots of people are putting us on a trajectory to hit global temperature increases in excess of 2 degrees centigrade. If that happens, then they're also predicting that this will cause sea level rises that will mean that land that's currently home to hundreds of millions of people will be underwater. So you can just imagine the deaths that this will cause, the humanitarian crisis, the refugee crisis that will be precipitated. I mean, it's absolutely terrifying. The other thing I wanted to write about when I was writing about the territory was education, and in particular, exams. So, and I know you guys have to sit loads of exams. When I was younger, I was lucky, I was really good at exams. So I thought, yeah, exams are a pretty good way of assessing intelligence because you always tend to rate things that you're good at. And I was lucky, I went to Oxford and I got a first, and I just always could do exams. After university, I was originally a lawyer, but then I set up my own tutoring agency, and I worked a lot with kids, particularly at GCSE and A-level sitting exams. And then I saw firsthand what loads of people knew way before me, that lots of bright kids really struggle with exams. So people can do like brilliantly for 2 years, but they just crumble under the pressure on exam day. And exams also, they often kind of favour short-term application of knowledge. So you just learn something, cram it all into your head, regurgitate it. It's nothing kind of long-term, there's no deeper understanding. Another thing that I found through tutoring, I worked with children, I did quite a lot of pro bono tutoring as well. So I worked with children from a huge range of schools. And then often I found that it was the quality of the school that the child went to and the amount of outside help they received as much, which contributed as much to the results the child got as natural academic ability. So for example, when I was being paid, people wouldn't pay me unless I was boosting their child's grades. So to some extent, you can buy grades. And I remember one year I was tutoring a boy who was a really rubbish school, and he was sitting his maths GCSE. And then a week before his English Lit GCSE, he said, can you help me with the poetry component? Because my teacher's just found out that she hasn't taught it to me. So he had 1 week to study kind of 13 different poems to get good enough to write essays on them. He was going up against another girl I was tutoring, actually tutoring English to, who had through her school, teacher curated mind maps for every single poem. So it was 2 children with such different levels of preparation going up against each other in the same exam. So what I'm often asked about the world of the territory is, do I think it could ever happen? So I've talked a bit about global warming. So I think things can go very wrong, but probably not 40 years in the future. I can sped things up to scare people. But when I finished writing book 1 in the summer of 2015, I looked into whether other things that I'd written about could come into being. So in the world of the territory, the dry land is separated from the wetlands by huge towering like electrical mosquito grids. And then there's lots and lots of malaria in the wetlands. I looked, could malaria come to Britain? And there's some quite frightening reports from climate change scientists suggesting that by 2030, temperatures in southern Britain could be such that mosquitoes capable of carrying the malarial plasmodium could reproduce for up to 3 months of the year here. So we could potentially have malaria in Britain by 2030. Then I looked to see if the other technology I'd written about could come into being, so whether people could get stuff from a computer and stick it into their head, basically. And in June 2015, there was a really interesting article in the Times by the then director of engineering at Google. And he was predicting by 2030, so again, the year to look out for, people will be able to connect their brains to the internet via DNA nanotubes and thereby be able to artificially enhance their own intelligence. So what I'd like you guys to think about, if that technology were available now, if you could connect your brain to a computer through a lead in the back of your head, would you do it? And I think it's a really difficult question to think about. So I would hate it, absolutely hate it. But then if you think you could learn a language like that, it would be absolutely amazing. If anyone in your class was using it, then you would be competing against people who had instant access to all the information they needed for recall. So you'd be at a complete disadvantage if you didn't. But I really hope this technology doesn't come into being. I mean, there's so many ways it could go wrong. Maybe you could get a virus put in your head, someone could hack your brain, an unscrupulous authoritarian government could brainwash you. I mean, what a perfect tool. Also, I think it would lead to quite a depressed population. So if you think what makes you feel good about yourself, it's like something that you've achieved, something you've worked for and then done well at. But if you could ace any exam by just connecting your brain to a computer, then you're not going to have any of that sense of achievement, any of that sense of kind of well-being. So yes, I'm really hoping it doesn't happen. Okay, I've talked a lot about the world of the territory, but that's the place that most writers who are writing kind of dystopia or sci-fi, that's where they start, because world building is so important. But that's not to say characters aren't important too. So in the territory, the main character is a girl called Noah, who's 15, because that's the age you are when you sit the exam. I wanted to see her and her friends kind of go through the process and have the fallout afterwards. I didn't want her to be like your typical dystopian heroine, like a kind of Katniss of this world, because I find them slightly unrelatable. I wanted her to be more flawed and more human and more selfish. So she really wants to survive no matter what the cost. She's a norm, and that means she can't upload stuff from a computer into her brain. She has to work really, really, really hard to try and compete. But she's lucky because she goes to a good school because her mum works for the ministry. Her two best friends are Daisy and Jack. Daisy's a bit more superficial, so they're worried that she won't pass. She's also a norm, as is Jack. Jack's very artistic, and they don't prize that in the world of the territory. They only prize logical subjects like maths and science. Also, he's got anger issues because his dad was a member of the opposition and then got shot by the police. And there's a new kid at school, Raph, who Noah starts to fall for, but they don't know if they can trust him because he's got a node in the back of his neck. So that's the territory. Then my new book, this was only out about 10 days ago, We Go On Forever. So this is set in a world where antibiotics don't work anymore. And there's a new disease going around called staph that's killing everyone, basically. But the elite have their own method of survival. So before their bodies die, they can upload all their kind of thoughts and their memories, all their mental processes into a new host body, and therefore achieve a form of immortality. Antibiotic resistance, so it's a real fear of mine. So I don't know if you know much about antibiotics. If you're in year 10, you've probably done a bit for GCSEs. So antibiotics, they're basically medicines that can kill bacterial infections, but overexposure to them can cause bacteria to mutate, so they can change shape and therefore become immune to the antibiotics. You might have heard of the concept of superbugs or MRSA. So bacteria which are becoming resistant, they're very difficult to stop. And the World Health Organization actually describes antibacterial resistance as one of the greatest threats to human health today. Already many common illnesses such as pneumonia, salmonellosis, some types of blood poisoning, some venereal diseases are becoming increasingly difficult, if not sometimes impossible, to treat. And I find this really, really, really scary, particularly, again, as I said, I've got 3 young children. Each of them has needed antibiotics at least once in their life. So the World Health Organization is saying without urgent action, we could soon be heading into a post-antibiotic era, so meaning they won't be available. So this fear of mine could soon become a reality. However, it's not a pandemic novel. So I wrote this book pre-pandemic, actually pre-COVID, and then edited it during COVID. So it was quite weird editing some of the stuff that I'd written about, for example, people wearing masks, or universities being these kind of deserted ghost towns, when some of this was starting to come true. It was just quite a surreal, scary experience. But as much as being a book about disease, it's a book about lies. So it's a book about the lies that we tell other people, but more importantly, it's a book about the lies that we tell ourselves. So the times when we are, when we deliberately don't recognize the truth of a situation, or we're willfully ignorant. And it's a book about the evil that can be perpetrated when we allow ourselves to view a group of people as somehow other. So we say they're different to us, then we can treat them as lesser to us, and then we can inflict harm upon them. So it's a book about the necessity of recognizing and maintaining our shared humanity. There are 2 narrators. So there's Arthur and Alba. So Arthur is the son of the guy who runs the corporation who came up with this whole digital immortality process. So he lives a very rich life, a life of leisure, but he's not happy. He's incredibly dissatisfied. His attempts to devote his life to researching new antibiotics, to researching vaccines, are always frustrated by lack of funding from his father. On the other side, we have Alba. So she lives in a very different reality. The truth lies somewhere in between the 2. So Alba is in a home surrounded by a radioactive wilderness. She's studying really hard because every week she has interviews, she has tests in which she's trying to impress some research scientists. And she really wants them to choose her as the next apprentice. They've already chosen her best friend, Curly, and she's desperate to cross the wilderness and join her. Then the 2 characters meet, everything comes together, and everything falls apart. This was such a fun book to write. So as soon as you're writing about kind of lies and truth, then there's so much potential for drama. Really, really fun. It's the first time I've written a dual narrator. And again, that's really interesting because you get to look at a situation from 2 entirely different perspectives. It's also the first book that I've written in the present tense. So that was fun. It took me a little bit of time to get used to, because I think I naturally write in the past tense, so I'd have to go through and correct myself a bit to start with. But the good thing about the present tense is it's great for action. It adds this real sense of immediacy. And it's also good for suspense, because obviously if you're writing in the present tense, you're not giving away whether either both or none of your characters will survive till the end. What I did in We Go On Forever, as well as in The Territory, the chapters are really short. And in both books, this was a really, really kind of conscious decision of mine. So I don't know about you, but I love reading, okay? So I read every night, but I hate stopping in the middle of a chapter. It's just a no-go for me, no. So if I finish a chapter, I will always look ahead and I'll see how many more pages will there be until there's a natural stopping place and I can stop again. So if I look ahead and it's like 25 pages until I can stop, then I'll probably think, right, too tired, that'll do, I'll do that tomorrow. But so I wanted people to never feel like that. I wanted them to always look ahead, and there'd only ever be 4 sides before they could stop again. So the idea is that hopefully, by doing short chapters, people will get sucked into the story more, because they'll always think, oh, I could just read a little bit more, I could read a little bit more, and then kind of keep going in that vein. So similarly to The Territory, after I wrote We Go On Forever, I thought I'll have a look into whether this could ever come into being. So I've talked a bit about antibiotic resistance and how terrifying that all is. But then I thought, okay, let's have a look into digital immortality. Could that be a thing? And absolutely terrifyingly, at the moment, scientists are working on kind of well-funded projects to work onto scanning people's brains and then accurately enough to create a version of the mental state which includes long-term memory and a feeling of self, copying this onto a computer. The computer could then run a simulation of your digital brain, which would respond like an actual brain and experience having a conscious mind. So this is called mind uploading, and billionaires are pumping a huge amount of money into this at the moment because they all want to live forever. And 7 years ago, there was a huge conference in New York about this premise, and people are predicting, hopefully this is not going to be true, that this technology will be possible by 2045. So people will be able to create a digital copy of their mind by 2045. Absolutely terrifying. Okay, because this is my new book, I'm going to read you a tiny extract from it. So this is the first chapter of Alba. I'm sitting next to Curly, willing the morning meeting to end. Eventually the screen recedes and the supervisor twists up the corners of her mouth in a poor imitation of a smile. Now some good news, she says, trying to sound light and enthusiastic. It doesn't suit her. Another one of you has been chosen as an apprentice. Tomorrow they'll travel to the research city to help their mentor with the crucial work of cleansing the wilderness. Praise the creator. Praise the creator, we all mumble back. But no one's putting any effort into it. We're all too busy scanning the room. 700 heartbeats stopped in anticipation. Who is it? Who's been chosen? Will F3526 please approach the stage? It takes a second to register who she's talking about. The creator assigns us our numbers. To deviate from them is heresy, even though nearly everyone apart from the supervisor and the guardians does it. My heart stops as Curly shoots me a quick look of astonishment and then stands up and starts to edge forward through a sea of applause. Curly, no, I inwardly scream. I know I should be happy for her, rejoicing too, but all I can think is, please don't take my friend, not yet. I'm going to miss her too much. I know I'm being selfish and I should ask the creator for forgiveness, but still, it's Curly, and she's been my best friend, my only proper friend since forever. I don't know why it comes as such a surprise. I always knew she'd be one of the first of our year to be chosen. She's off the scale clever, mastering further maths and physics, while the rest of us were still groping around with Newton and his apple. And she's beautiful, stunning even. She has this flawless dark brown skin and black curls that just sort of tumble around her face. And when she moves, she kind of glides. All the boys just stare at her. The guardians too, ever since she turned 14. The younger ones clap with barely contained excitement. Eligibility for selection starts at 16, so to be chosen at 17 is an incredible honor, and it gives them hope that it'll be them soon. It's different with the older ones, the ones in their late 20s. If they're not chosen by 30, they'll be transferred to a different home. Their applause is mechanical and jealousy palpably radiates off them. If you could see them on a different plane, their eyes would be leaping out at you, shining the brightest green. Me, I just taste bile rising at the back of my throat. Eventually, Curly reaches the foot of the stage and then climbs the steps to stand at the supervisor's side. Congratulations, F3526. You've been selected as the next apprentice. You are to report to the office tomorrow morning at 7. I hope the rest of you take inspiration from her deportment, intelligence, and dedication. The supervisor doesn't hug Curly or even smile at her in any way. She just watches her face, no doubt for evidence of the required level of gratitude. Thank you. Praise the creator, Curly replies, her voice measured and lyrical as she gives the obligatory response. But she isn't okay, I know she isn't, even before she trips on the last step as she descends from the stage. Okay, I'm going to tell you a quick little bit about how I got into writing. So when I was your age, I had no idea that I was going to be a writer. I loved writing, I know, loved reading, and I'd write little stories for myself, but I didn't think that's what I would do with my life. So originally I wanted to be a doctor. And for A-levels, I did maths, biology, chemistry, and history. But then when I was at school, if you wanted to be a doctor, in the 6th form, you went on a kind of organized trip to a dissection room to see what medical students did, which was a really good idea because I hated what medical students did. And I felt violently ill, had to leave the room and couldn't be a doctor. So instead I did law. So I did law at Oxford, really enjoyed it. It's such an interesting course, all about ideas, what the law should be, lots of philosophy of law. Then when I left that, I did like 1 year of law school, and then I was a kind of corporate commercial lawyer in the city, and I hated that. And that's got nothing to do with law or ideas or philosophy. So it really suits some people. It just didn't suit me. So I left not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. Then I started tutoring for some agencies. I actually really enjoyed it, but I thought I could do a better job. So I set up my own agency and ran that for 10 years. And that was really fun. And then while I was doing that, I had the idea for a book, but I had no time to write it. So no one pays you to write your first book. You have to fit that in around a job that does pay you and all the rest of your life. So when my first daughter was born, I knew that I was going to take 6 months off work. So while she slept, I had a go at writing, so I typed. And she was a rubbish sleeper. So I'd write for about half an hour here, half an hour there, but I really, really enjoyed it. And then over 2 years, I finished a book. And then I didn't know what the next steps were. But then I saw in the Times paper, they ran a competition for people who, authors who hadn't been published before and didn't have an agent. So I entered that and then luckily got shortlisted for that. Then an agent approached me off the back of that. And then I got a book deal and kept writing. So it's been really, really fun. It's quite an up and down life. It's not that stable, but it's really enjoyable. So I do like what I do. So yeah, if you guys have got any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them.
Thank you so much for that. I think we all found that really interesting and inciting. One of my questions to you is, what do you think personally to you makes dystopian stories so appealing?
Good question. So for me, I think it's, I think the plot twists. So the fact that they are fun to read, but often the fact that they have a deeper meaning as well. So I think in the same way that I really enjoyed, studying law and talking about ideas, I think dystopian books, they're all ideas based, and I find that really interesting.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for your talk. Just reiterating. My question is, obviously the quintessential novel, 1984, about dystopia, is I've read some reviews of your book and I think that there were a few comparisons there. How much do you think that your society in the territory is based around the society of 1984 in the same way that there's constant surveillance, examination from the aristocracy, the top of society, onto everyone else, in which the lower down people in society are often at a much greater disadvantage?
So I guess there could be certain parallels in kind of authoritarian control and surveillance. Definitely, I think one difference would be that in the territory, the characters still have, because they're children, they're kind of teenagers. It's almost like a coming of age story as well. So the characters at the start don't realize how bad the world is because they've been sheltered from it. They're going to a really good school where lots of people do pass. They've got a chance. She's not like her cousin Ella, who's at a really bad school, and they're kind of prepared to fail. So they are kind of taught to pass. And it's only as the series progresses that her eyes are open to the true kind of horror of the situation. So I'd say, yes, she's coming to it. She's more naive than the characters in 1984. And also because they're young, they've still got a sense of humor. And I wanted there to be this kind of discordant lightness to it, because I do think in reality, whatever world you're in, you would still laugh occasionally with your friends, because laughter is such a kind of human coping mechanism. So I wanted to have that in. And also I find it almost scarier if characters are laughing against a backdrop of evil, almost like in like a horror movie where they play like plinky plonky music box and then there's a guy with a knife. So to have the kind of difference between the two, I think can make it more frightening.
Thank you for your talk. My question is, would you predict that society is headed towards a dystopian or utopian ending?
So hopefully neither. I think dystopian's more like, I don't think humans are suited to utopia. I think every well-meaning attempt to create a utopia has failed because of human nature. Hopefully people are starting to like open their eyes to future dangers, and hopefully they'll take lots of action before it's too late, and then we won't end up with some truly dystopian future. But I think we've got to take quite a lot of important steps now in order to prevent that.
I was going to ask, just bouncing off of Elizabeth's point, that the boundary between a dystopia and utopia seems to be very slim, in the way that how you've described your dystopias is, immortality and intelligence freely, but the only difference between them is that they're being used by the wrong people for the wrong purposes. So where do you think the line between said utopia and dystopia is?
Oh, very deep. So I think in these, it's never, there isn't ever a utopian option for the whole of society. There's always like one survival option that's being reserved for the elite. So I think, that's kind of it. I think you can't have, they're all dystopian because only a tiny portion of society has access to supposedly the good stuff. But I think also what I wanted to do in these books, I wanted it to be like a bit like nuanced and grey. So when you think it's like the good stuff, so like immortality, you might think that's amazing, immortality, how wonderful, I wish I could achieve that. Then I want you to see that actually in reality, immortality, it wouldn't be good. Like a whole series of the same isn't going to do anything great for anyone. You're not going to end up having a life that means anything if you live forever. And similarly in the territory, okay, the kids who find they can upload stuff into their brains, if you read the book, I don't want to give anything too much away, there's a downside to it as well. So it might seem good, but maybe you're uploading more than information, if that makes sense. Great. Next question.
So say someone wanted to start writing dystopian future stories, what would you advise them to avoid doing?
Oh, I don't know if I'd advise them to avoid doing anything. I'd advise them to think about issues that mean something to them. I think it's a lot easier to write about stuff and get passionate about stuff if you genuinely feel it. So I know lots of people who start books and they never finish them. So I think your best shot at actually finishing a book is to write about a topic that absolutely fascinates you and potentially really scares you. I think that's quite good. Next question, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So my second question was about the We Go On Forever book. This obviously, sets up a lot more questions than I think can be answered in the span of one book. Do you think there's ever going to be, are you planning a sequel for it? Is it, is the future looking bright for the future of antibiotic resistance in this universe?
So yes, there probably will be a sequel, but it's very hard to say anything about that without ruining the ending of the first book. So some sort of sequel, yes.
Could you pinpoint any dystopian features in our society today?
Overpopulation. I think we're heading for real kind of problems with overpopulation at the moment, particularly as kind of global warming is worsening and the land that's going to be available to grow kind of produce and stuff is going to be shrinking. I think we are going to have serious problems with kind of lack of land, lack of resources, and there are going to be some really, really difficult choices for people to make.
So someone had asked, do you have any particular readers in mind while writing?
No, so I try and write, they're normally aimed, they're kind of aimed at teenagers, but they're read a lot by adults as well. But no, I normally just try and write for myself. I think if you try and analyze too much as you're writing, or you're writing to try and please someone or to appeal to someone, then that can be quite stultifying. So I personally find the easiest thing to do is just to go into my own head, and I kind of just enter a weird little world where I almost can't hear anyone else or can't see anyone else, and just write in that zone and write for me, and then just hope other people like it when I finish.
Someone's asked, how would you build on the antagonists or threats within a dystopian story?
So I think just to try and make them as threatening as possible, and to try and make them seem real. And often for me, I think the scariest evil is well-intentioned evil. So it can be a system that doesn't seem too cruel to start with. So for example, in the territory, there would be absolutely no way, there's no good way to cut population. There's no way that's completely fair or that everyone's going to like. So the idea is the government, they weren't trying to be truly evil when they introduced an exam. They were trying to keep the best minds in the territory to solve the problems of global warming. But then the idea, then it gets kind of corrupted and it gets worse. So I like kind of well-intentioned evil because it seems very real to me, and I find it terrifying.
Joe asked, to what degree do you plan your plots, and if you could give any examples of your characters making decisions that surprise you?
So I don't like planning much in advance. So when I wrote the first book, The Territory, I didn't plan that at all. I kind of knew where I wanted the characters to end up, but I didn't know how I was going to get there. And then that's quite fun, because then it, like, who passed and who failed kind of came to me as we went along, and that was quite surprising. So that was quite fun. In my new book, We Go On Forever, again, I didn't plan that at all in advance. So when one character, Arthur's kind of best friend, does something, that kind of surprised me, and that's quite fun. But the trouble is, so publishers don't really like you writing like that. I find that's the most fun way to write, but publishers don't like that. They want to know in advance what they're buying, basically. So when I wrote book 2 of The Territory, they said, right, you have 2 weeks, and then we'd like you to give us a summary, like a 1-page summary of exactly what's going to happen in book 2. And I hated that. That was awful, just on the spot trying to think up like exactly what was going to happen in a whole book. But then when I look back at it now, what actually happened in book 2 bore very little relation to this summary that I'd written. But luckily they were okay with that. And then when I wrote book 3 of that, they said, okay, don't bother giving us a summary, because we know that won't be your book. Just write it, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. So that, I find that more fun.
Someone's asked, how do you stay motivated while writing your books, and how are you able to balance work life and what you were truly enjoying to do?
Good question. I think if you're a writer, you have to be really driven, or you won't write books. So I'm lucky. I've always been kind of quite driven, and most of my adult life I've been self-employed. To be self-employed, you have to be driven, because no one hands you a paycheck. You have to get out there and you have to earn your money. For balancing it, it's really hard. So all my books I've written like with young kids. So my youngest kid's like 2 at the moment, and I get a maximum normally of an hour a day to write when he sleeps. So the ideas have to percolate through my brain all day, and then I'm quite lucky that when I sit down, I can switch my brain into gear, and then I'm just like the most focused, most intense person in the world for like an hour, and then I have to stop. But so I'm lucky that I can do it like that. But I think the one good thing of having to do it like that, of having it so intense, is there's no time to kind of sit around and have nice ideas or to worry too much. And I think that's when people start getting writer's block. If they have the whole day stretching out in front of them, then it's like, oh, what shall I do next? And then they start to worry. Whereas I have like an hour and I have to make it count. So I make myself write 500 words, even if I don't keep any of them. I just make myself do it and keep on going, because I know that otherwise I just won't finish a book. Thanks.
Returning to the subject matter of some of your books, how much of it is based on the problems of the class system? Because in We Go On Forever, obviously there's the elite, and they're the only ones able to afford this effective immortality. And in The Territory, the node that you can put into the back of your neck, of course, is essentially a free ticket to survival. So do you think that that's reflected in all dystopian works? Do you think that that's reflected in current society? How much of a role does it play in your writing?
I think that I wouldn't call it the class system, but I would call it money. And yes, I think that's a really recurrent theme in dystopia, because the life that you live if you have a lot of money compared with the life that you live if you don't is just like, so there's so many miles apart what you have access to. So in the new one, yes, it is a commentary in like difference in like access to healthcare if you've got lots of money, like if you don't. Yes, in The Territory, if you've got access to, if you can like tutor your child for 2 hours after school when they've already gone to like an amazing school during the day, obviously they're going to do far better in life than if they're going to a school where they're not being taught very well. No one's got any aspiration for them. So yeah, I would say that. But also, if you're writing dystopia, so yes, I would say that is a very real problem, but then it's quite a useful baddie to have. No one's going to mind if you make like the rich people the baddie. So in a way, it's quite a safe baddie to have.
Joe asked, is there one element which you actually dislike writing, for example, dialogue, or do you like all aspects of writing fiction?
I like all aspects of writing fiction, actually. I really like, I think some of the bits that I used to like least was like romantic bits. So I quite like writing the romance in the new one, We Go On Forever. But when I was first writing like The Territory, I was just so excited by all the action. So I'd be typing away, and then you'd have these like little brackets being put in romantic moment here. And I'd keep going with all the action. But now I like stripped back sort of nuanced romance, but I don't like gushy heart on sleeve romance. I also wouldn't be able to write horror just because I have such a problem with blood. So mine would be the lamest, least scary horror story that had ever been written. Yeah, next question.
Someone asked if you would ever like to see your books become a TV or film series, and if you would write the script for it.
So yes, The Territory, as I said, that trilogy has been optioned by a company called New Pictures. So they made some adult shows called like The Missing, and they made Catherine the Great, and they made a YA show called The Innocents, which was a couple of years ago, that had Guy Pearce in it. So they've optioned it, and they've actually got a screenwriter who's writing the pilot at the moment. So I wasn't allowed to write the screenplay for it because I'm unknown as a screenwriter, which is fair enough. But also I think it'd be very hard to adapt my own book. So they wanted to add some extra characters to it. They've changed some of the characters quite a lot in ways that I'm sure will be great. But I think it'd be very difficult for me to make those changes myself. But on the other hand, I have written a couple of screenplays as well. And so it's been quite fun actually writing in a completely different style.
Yeah, so we obviously know that The Territory and We Go On Forever are based essentially around real problems, global warming, climate change, and antibiotic resistance. How much do you think that this will spread information about it, get the word out, or how much do you think it was impacted by the way that society deals with the problems already?
So I think one of the reasons I wanted to write it is I think fiction can sometimes be more powerful and have more influence than fact. So for example, if I was helping kids doing, I think it was both in biology and geography GCSE, people learn their 5 or 10 points about global warming. So it's global warming, well, da 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 da, and it stops having any emotional impact because it's just, again, it's regurgitated facts. Whereas I think when people see it fictionalized, it hopefully has kind of more impact. I know that things have more impact on me often if I read them in a book or if I watch them in a film than if I watch, say, a documentary about it. For me, it's like storytelling's the most impactful thing. And so, for example, my oldest daughter's now 10, and she read The Territory, and then she was like, "We're all gonna die, mummy." And there was like, and then I had to become a climate change denier for a bit, going, no, 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 we're not. It's never gonna happen. But yeah, I think fiction can sometimes have more impact than fact.
Joe asks, what would be your advice for a young writer if they've written their first novel and are looking for a publisher?
So a good way is the route I went to, competitions. So keep your eye out for any competitions because it's a good way to come to the attention of agents. So most publishers won't let you, as just a normal individual, they won't let you submit manuscripts directly to them. So your first step is normally to get an agent. So if you don't manage to do it through a competition or anything like that, you can get a book called The Writers and Artists Yearbook. And that basically lists like all the book agents out there, and you can have a look, and then you can look up on their websites, and they'll normally be very clear. You can click on different agents and they'll say, are they open to submissions at the moment? What sort of material are they looking for? What sort of genres do they like? And then you can submit to them. So normally you have to submit something like a 1-page summary of your whole book, a little paragraph about you, and then often you have to submit, it's only something like the first 3,000 to 5,000 words of your novel. So my advice would be, particularly if you're writing for teenagers, try and have an exciting event in the first 3,000 to 5,000 words of your book. So particularly, again, as I was saying, particularly for young adult fiction, people want it to hit hard, hit fast. So there's no messing around at the start. You want to jump into the action with like some big scene that's going to make your readers want to keep on going. Next question.
Joe had another question. You mentioned your daughter being frightened by The Territory. Are there limits to what you would describe in young adult fiction?
Yes, yeah, I prefer things to be kind of hinted at rather than graphically written about. So I think in my mind, some young adult fiction it's like gratuitously violent, and I don't like gratuitous violence. Like, I don't mind violence being there, but I'd prefer to almost have to imagine it in my head than to have it all spelt out. Also, what I wanted to do in The Territory was, like, if there was violence, I wanted it to affect people. So often in these sort of books, like, people will just do all this killing and then it won't scar them at all. It'll be like, yay, off we go, let's go and do something else. I wanted in The Territory, I wanted it to be, if you killed someone, it scarred you kind of psychologically and it haunted you. Because I think that's how it would really be. And so I want all lives to kind of have meaning and death to be harrowing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Zarah, for hosting that talk on dystopian fantasy. I think we all found it very engaging and insightful. So thank you very much to Dulwich College, SSLP, and Mr. Fletcher for hosting the talk and organising it. And thank you to the audience for your questions. We do have an upcoming talk on journalism next week, Tuesday at 5 p.m. So please join if you're interested in that. Have a lovely evening.